A cowboy with nothing left to lose, a widow with nowhere left to go. He offered shelter. She offered something greater, and together they built what the world had stolen from them, both a home. The gun misfired. That was all it took. One bad click in a storm of bullets, and now Samuel Frost was running through the canyon with a hole in his shoulder, and 3 men on his trail who wouldn't stop until he was face down in the dirt. He pressed his hand against the wound, blood seeping hot between his fingers, and stumbled forward through the sagebrush. His horse was dead a mile back, shot out from under him in the ambush. The men chasing him were Jessup's crew, and Jessup didn't forgive debts or betrayals or men who walked away from his operation still breathing. Samuel's vision blurred. He tripped over a rock and went down hard, biting back a shout as pain exploded through his shoulder. Behind him, voices carried on the wind. They were close, too close. He forced himself up, legs shaking, and pushed forward into the fading light. The sun was setting fast, turning the desert into a wash of red and gold that would have been beautiful if he wasn't bleeding out. Then he saw it. A small cabin tucked against the base of the canyon wall, smoke rising thin and gray from the chimney. Samuel didn't think. He ran. His boots hit the wooden porch and he pounded on the door with his good hand, gasping for air, darkness creeping in at the edges of his vision. The door opened and he fell forward into warmth and lamplight and the startled cry of a woman. "Dear God," she breathed, stepping back as Samuel collapsed onto her floor. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His shoulder screamed and his lungs burned, and all he could do was look up at her through the haze of pain. She was older than him, maybe 50, with silver streaked through her dark hair and eyes that had seen enough of the world to know trouble when it landed on her doorstep. She knelt beside him, hands moving quickly to peel back his coat and press a cloth against the wound. "Who shot you?" she asked, voice steady despite the blood soaking into her floor. Samuel coughed, tasting copper. "Men," he managed. "Coming." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't panic. Instead, she stood, moved to the window, and peered out into the growing darkness. Samuel watched her silhouette against the lamplight, the way her shoulders tensed when she saw something he couldn't. "How many?" she asked. "3, Samuel gasped. "Maybe more." She turned back to him, and for a moment he thought she might throw him out, let him face what was coming on his own. Instead, she crossed the room, pulled a rifle down from above the door, and checked the chamber with practiced hands. "Can you stand?" she asked. Samuel gritted his teeth and pushed himself up, using the wall for support. His shoulder felt like it was on fire, but he nodded. "Good," she said. "Get to the back room. Stay quiet." He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't have to do this, but the look in her eyes stopped him cold. This woman had made her choice the moment she opened the door. Samuel limped toward the back room as she moved to the window again. He heard the horses before he saw them, hooves crunching on gravel as they approached the cabin. 3 riders, just like he'd said. They stopped outside and he heard a man's voice call out, rough and impatient. "Anyone home?" The widow, Samuel didn't even know her name yet, stepped onto the porch, rifle held low but ready. "What do you want?" she called back, voice hard as stone. "Looking for a man," the rider said. Samuel recognized the voice. Cade, Jessup's right hand, mean as a rattlesnake and twice as quick. "Wounded, came through here on foot. You seen him?" There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Samuel held his breath, blood dripping onto the floor beneath him. "No," the widow said firmly. "Haven't seen anyone all day." Cade didn't sound convinced. "Mind if we take a look around?" Her rifle came up just enough to make her point clear. "I do mind. This is my land. You've got no business here." Tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Samuel could hear the leather creak as the men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their guns. He looked around the room desperately and found a revolver hanging on the wall beside an old photograph. He took it down, checked the cylinder, fully loaded, and moved back toward the doorway, ready to step out if this went south. "Ma'am," Cade said slowly, voice dropping into something dangerous. "We don't want trouble, but that man killed one of ours. We're taking him back, dead or alive." "Then you best look somewhere else," the widow replied, "because he's not here." The silence stretched. Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger, waiting. Then Cade laughed, short and bitter. "All right then, but if we find out you're lying, we'll be back. and next time we won't knock so polite." The horses turned and rode off into the darkness, their hoofbeats fading until all that remained was the wind and the wild hammering of Samuel's heart. The widow stepped back inside and closed the door, setting the rifle down with hands that trembled just slightly. She turned to look at Samuel standing there in the doorway, gun in hand and blood still dripping from his shoulder. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "I know," Samuel replied. She moved past him toward the back room, gathering clean cloth and a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet. "Sit down before you fall down," she ordered, and Samuel obeyed, lowering himself onto a wooden chair. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with steady hands while Samuel bit down on a strip of leather to keep from screaming. The bullet had gone clean through, which was lucky, but the damage was bad enough. When she finished wrapping his shoulder, she sat back and looked at him properly for the first time. "What's your name?" she asked. "Samuel Frost," he said through gritted teeth. "And you?" "Clara Whitmore," she replied. "Now tell me why those men want you dead." Samuel hesitated. The truth was ugly and complicated and full of choices he wasn't proud of. But this woman had just saved his life, lied to armed men on his behalf, and earned at least that much honesty. "I rode with them," he admitted. "With Jessup's gang. We hit a payroll wagon 3 weeks back. It went bad, real bad. People died who shouldn't have, and I wanted out. Jessup doesn't let people walk away." Clara's expression didn't change much, but something hardened in her eyes. "So you're an outlaw?" "It wasn't a question." "Was," Samuel corrected. "I'm done with that life. I just want to disappear, start over somewhere nobody knows my name." Clara stood and moved to the window again, looking out into the darkness where Cade and his men had vanished. "They'll search every homestead within 20 miles, she said. "When they don't find you, they'll come back here. And next time, they won't leave just because I tell them to." Samuel felt the weight of what he'd brought to her door settle heavy in his chest. "I'll leave at first light," he said. "Head into the mountains, lose them in the high country. You've done enough already." Clara turned to face him and shook her head slowly. "You won't make it 10 miles in your condition. That shoulder needs time to heal and you need rest. Besides," she paused, something flickering across her face, "they're already suspicious. If you disappear now, they'll know I lied. They'll burn this place to the ground, just on principle." "So what do we do?" Samuel asked. Clara was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she said something that surprised him. "You stay. We tell anyone who asks that you're my hired hand, came looking for work and I took you on. It's not unusual. Widows need help running a place like this." Samuel stared at her. "That's a dangerous lie to tell." "Everything's dangerous now," Clara replied. "The moment I opened that door, I made my choice. Might as well see it through." The rest of the night passed in uneasy quiet. Clara made up a bedroll near the fire and insisted Samuel rest while she kept watch. He tried to argue, but exhaustion and blood loss won out. As he drifted toward sleep, he watched her silhouette against the window, rifle across her lap, and wondered what kind of woman faced down killers without flinching. What kind of loneliness drove someone to risk everything for a stranger bleeding on their floor? Morning came cold and gray. Samuel woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, his shoulder throbbing, but the bleeding stopped. Clara was at the stove, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this alone for a long time. She glanced over when he stirred. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I got shot," Samuel replied, sitting up slowly. "But alive, thanks to you." She set a plate in front of him without comment and sat down across the table with her own coffee. They ate in silence until Samuel finally asked the question that had been nagging at him since last night. "Why?" Clara looked up. "Why what? Why help me? You don't know me. For all you know, I deserved what Jessup's men wanted to do to me." She considered this, fingers wrapped around her cup. "Maybe you did," she said eventually. "But I've lived long enough to know that what a man was doesn't have to be what he is. Besides, I know what it's like to run from something with nowhere left to go." Before Samuel could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching horses cut through the morning air. Both of them froze. Clara moved to the window and Samuel grabbed the revolver, his heart racing. But it wasn't Cade and his men. It was a single rider, older, wearing a star on his vest, the local sheriff. Clara's shoulders relaxed slightly, but Samuel saw the new tension in her jaw. "Stay here," she said. "Let me handle this." She stepped outside and Samuel watched through the gap in the door as the sheriff dismounted. "Morning, Clara," the man said, tipping his hat. "Sheriff Byron," she replied evenly. "What brings you out this way?" The sheriff looked uncomfortable, like a man delivering news he didn't want to share. "Had some riders come through town last night, hard men asking questions about a wounded stranger, said he might have passed through these parts." Clara's face remained perfectly calm. "I haven't seen anyone like that." Byron studied her for a moment too long and Samuel felt his hand tighten on the gun. "These men," Byron continued carefully, "they're connected to Jessup Kane. You know that name?" "I know it," Clara said. "Everyone knows it." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then you know they're not the sort to ask politely twice. If you do see this man they're looking for, you'd be smart to send word. Don't get caught in the middle of something that's not your fight." There was a warning in his words, maybe even concern, but Clara's expression didn't shift. "I appreciate the advice, Sheriff, but I've been taking care of myself for a long time now. I'll be fine." Byron looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he just tipped his hat again. "All right then. You stay safe, Clara." He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving dust hanging in the still morning air. When Clara came back inside, Samuel let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "He knows something," Samuel said. Clara nodded. "Maybe, but Byron's a decent man. If he does, he's choosing to look the other way." She moved to the stove and poured herself more coffee, her hand steady again. "That won't last forever, though. Eventually someone's going to force his hand." Samuel stood carefully, testing his shoulder. The pain was there but manageable. "I should go," he said again, "before this gets worse for you." Clara turned to face him, and for the first time he saw something raw in her expression. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. Not of him or Jessup's men. Fear of the silence that would come after he left. The emptiness of this cabin without another voice to fill it. "I told you last night," she said quietly. "You stay. We tell the story we agreed on. You're my hired hand. That's all anyone needs to know." Samuel searched her face, looking for the real reason beneath the practical words. "Why are you really doing this, Clara?" She set down her cup and met his eyes. "Because I'm tired of being alone," she said simply. "Because this place is too big and too quiet for one person. Because maybe we can help each other survive what we're both running from." The honesty of it hit Samuel harder than he expected. Here was a woman who'd lost something. He could see it in every corner of this cabin, in the way she moved through rooms meant for more than one, and she was choosing to trust him with that emptiness. It was the bravest thing he'd seen in years. "All right," Samuel said finally. "I'll stay. For now. But the second this puts you in real danger, I'm gone. I won't let you pay for my mistakes." Clara almost smiled. "We'll see about that." She gestured toward the door. "For now, if you're going to be my hired hand, you might as well start earning your keep. There's firewood to split and the fence on the north side needs mending. Think you can manage with that shoulder?" Samuel felt something shift in his chest, something he couldn't quite name. Relief maybe, or purpose, or just the strange comfort of being needed. "I'll manage," he said. And so it began. Samuel Frost, outlaw and fugitive, became Clara Whitmore's hired hand. It was a dangerous lie built on borrowed time, but as he stepped out into the morning sun and picked up the axe with his good arm, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd found a place worth fighting for. The days bled together in a rhythm Samuel had forgotten existed. Wake before dawn, feed the animals, mend what was broken, chop what needed chopping. His shoulder screamed at him for the first week, every swing of the axe or pull of the fence wire sending fire down his arm. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering that men like Cade were still out there, still looking, still coming. Clara watched him work from the porch most mornings, coffee in hand, her expression unreadable. She didn't hover or fuss over his injury, didn't ask questions about his past beyond what he'd already told her. Instead, she moved through her own routines with quiet efficiency, tending her small garden, washing clothes in the creek, preparing meals that filled the cabin with smells that made Samuel's chest ache with something he couldn't name. It felt like home. That was the dangerous part. 2 weeks in, Samuel was fixing the barn door when a wagon rolled up the path. He froze, hand moving instinctively toward the gun he now kept tucked in his belt. But Clara emerged from the cabin and waved, her face brightening in a way he hadn't seen before. "Margaret," she called out, and Samuel relaxed slightly. Not trouble then, just a neighbor. The woman who climbed down from the wagon was round and cheerful, with gray hair pinned in a loose bun and flour dust on her apron. She pulled Clara into a fierce hug before stepping back to look at her properly. "It's been too long," Margaret said warmly. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten we existed." Clara smiled, genuine and soft. "Never, just been busy." Margaret's eyes drifted past her to where Samuel stood near the barn, and her eyebrows rose with obvious curiosity. "I can see that." Clara's cheeks colored slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Margaret, this is Samuel Frost. He's helping me with the place. Samuel, this is Margaret Sawyer. She runs the boarding house in town with her husband." Samuel stepped forward and tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am." Margaret studied him with the shrewd eyes of a woman who'd sized up men all her life. "Frost," she repeated slowly. "Don't recall that name from around here." "I'm new," Samuel said simply. "Came looking for work. Mrs. Whitmore was kind enough to take me on." Margaret looked between them, and Samuel could practically see her mind working, adding things up, forming conclusions. But whatever she thought, she kept it to herself. "Well," she said brightly, turning back to Clara, "I'm glad you've got help. This place is too much for one person to manage alone." She reached into her wagon and pulled out a covered basket. "Brought you some preserves and bread. Thomas made too much again." Clara took the basket with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. Come inside, I'll make tea." The two women disappeared into the cabin, leaving Samuel alone with his thoughts and the unsettling feeling that Margaret Sawyer had seen more than she was letting on. He returned to the barn door, but his ears were tuned to the low murmur of voices drifting through the open window. Inside, Margaret wasted no time. "All right," she said quietly once they were seated. "Who is he really?" Clara poured hot water into cups, her movements careful and deliberate. "I told you, a hired hand." "Clara," Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "I've known you for 15 years. You haven't let anyone close since Thomas died, and now suddenly there's a stranger living on your property. A young, handsome stranger who looks like he's running from something." Clara's hands stilled on the teapot. "He needed work. I needed help. That's all there is to it." Margaret reached across the table and covered Clara's hand with her own. "I'm not judging you. Lord knows you've been alone too long, but people talk, and if you're not careful, they'll talk about this too. You know how the town is." Clara pulled her hand back gently. "Let them talk. I'm doing nothing wrong." "I know that," Margaret said. "But does he?" She glanced toward the window where Samuel's silhouette was visible working near the barn. "That man's carrying more than fence posts, Clara. I can see it in the way he moves, the way his eyes never stop watching the horizon. Whatever he's running from, it's going to catch up eventually. And when it does, I don't want you caught in the crossfire." Clara was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea. "Maybe I'm tired of being safe," she said finally. "Maybe I'm tired of waking up every day to silence and going to bed the same way. He's not what you think, Margaret. He's just a man trying to start over." Margaret sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Clara's jaw. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful, and if you need help, any kind of help, you send word." They finished their tea talking about lighter things: town gossip, upcoming harvest, Margaret's endless battle with her husband's attempts at cooking. When Margaret finally left, she hugged Clara tight and whispered, "I mean it. You need anything, you send word." Clara nodded, watching the wagon disappear down the path before turning to find Samuel standing nearby, clearly having waited until the coast was clear. "She knows something's off," Samuel said. "It wasn't a question." Clara nodded. "Margaret's sharp, but she's also loyal. She won't cause trouble." Samuel rubbed his shoulder absently, a habit he developed when thinking hard. "Maybe I should go before more people start asking questions." "No." The word came out harder than Clara intended. She softened her tone. "We stick to the plan. You're my hired hand. People can think what they want." That night they sat across from each other at dinner, the silence between them different than before, more weighted, more aware. Finally Clara spoke. "Why'd you really do it?" Samuel looked up from his plate. "Do what?" "Leave Jessup's gang. Men don't just walk away from that life because they feel bad about a job gone wrong. What changed? Samuel set down his fork, his jaw working as he decided how much truth to give her. There was a girl, he said finally, at the payroll wagon, couldn't have been more than 16. She was just there, wrong place, wrong time, and Jessup. He stopped, his hands clenching into fists. He didn't have to kill her. The money was already ours. The guards were down, but he did it anyway, shot her in the back while she was running. Clara's expression didn't change, but her eyes held something fierce. And you tried to stop him. I pulled my gun on him, Samuel admitted. My own boss would have shot him too, but his men were faster. They beat me half to death and left me for the vultures. By the time I came to, I knew I was a dead man either way, so I ran. Figured if I was going to die, I'd at least die trying to be something better than what I was. The honesty of it sat between them like a living thing. Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his, her touch warm and steady. You're not a dead man, Samuel. Not here. Not while I have anything to say about it. He looked at their joined hands and felt something crack open inside his chest. Why do you care? He asked roughly. You don't even know me. I know enough, Clara said quietly. I know you work hard. I know you're gentle with the animals. I know you split extra firewood without being asked, and you fix things I didn't even know were broken. I know you could have left a dozen times by now, but you stayed. She paused, searching his face. And I know what it looks like when someone's trying to outrun their ghosts. I've been doing it for 3 years. Samuel turned his hand over, palm up, and she didn't pull away. Your husband? He asked gently. Clara nodded, her eyes distant. Thomas, he was a good man, strong, kind, everything you're supposed to want. We built this place together, planned to fill it with children and laughter and life. Her voice caught slightly. But the fever took him. 1 week he was fine, the next he was gone, just like that. I'm sorry, Samuel said, and meant it. Clara smiled sadly. Everyone's sorry. The whole town came to the funeral, brought food, offered condolences. But then they went home to their families, and I was here alone with a farm too big for one person and silence so loud it made me want to scream. She looked at him directly. So when you showed up bleeding on my doorstep, yeah, maybe I should have turned you away. But I didn't. Because for the first time in 3 years, this place felt less empty. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Samuel squeezed her hand gently. I won't let them hurt you, Clara. Whatever comes, I'll make sure you're safe. I know, she said, but that's not what I'm asking for. I'm not some helpless woman who needs rescuing. I'm asking for partnership. Someone to share the load with. Someone to talk to when the silence gets too heavy. I can do that, Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion he didn't quite understand. For as long as you'll have me. Clara's smile reached her eyes this time. Good, because I'm planning on keeping you around for a while, Mr. Frost. They sat like that, hands joined across the table, until the lamp burned low and the night pressed close against the windows. It was the most honest either of them had been in years. The next morning brought rain, steady and cold, drumming against the roof like 1,000 restless fingers. Samuel stood at the window watching water pour from the eaves while Clara kneaded bread dough at the table. Can't work outside in this, he said. Ground'll be too muddy. Clara didn't look up from her work. Then we find inside work. Barn needs organizing. Tools need sharpening. Always something. But before Samuel could respond, the sound of hooves cut through the rain. Multiple horses moving fast, both of them tensed. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the rifle while Samuel checked his revolver. Through the rain-streaked window, they watched 4 riders approach, led by a man Samuel recognized immediately. Cade. They're back, Samuel said, his voice flat. Clara's face went pale, but her hand stayed steady on the rifle. We knew they would be. The riders stopped in front of the cabin, rain pouring off their hats and coats. Cade dismounted slowly, deliberately, his eyes fixed on the door. Mrs. Whitmore, he called out, his voice carrying over the storm. Need to have a word. Clara opened the door just wide enough to be seen, rifle visible but not raised. State your business and be quick about it. I've got work to do. Cade smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. We've been searching for a friend of ours. Man named Samuel Frost. Heard tell he might have found work around these parts. Samuel's blood ran cold. Someone had talked. Margaret, the sheriff, or just bad luck and too many questions asked in too many places. Clara's expression didn't flicker. I hired a man named Frost a few weeks back. So what? Cade's smile widened. So I'd like to see him, make sure he's the same Frost we're looking for. He's not here, Clara said quickly. Sent him into town for supplies this morning. It was a good lie, quick and believable, but Cade wasn't buying it. In this rain, that's mighty convenient. He took a step closer. See, we talked to folks in town, and nobody's seen any stranger buying supplies. Which makes me think maybe you're lying again, Mrs. Whitmore. The other riders spread out slightly, hands resting on their guns. Samuel could feel the situation spiraling, could feel violence gathering in the air like the storm overhead. He made a choice. Before Clara could stop him, he opened the door wider and stepped into view. I'm right here, Cade. No need to threaten the lady. Cade's eyes lit up with triumph. Well, well, there you are, Frost. Been looking for you for weeks now. Samuel stepped off the porch into the rain, moving away from Clara and the cabin. If this was going to go bad, he wanted the danger as far from her as possible. I'm done with Jessup, he said flatly. Done with the life, just let me go. Can't do that, Cade replied, his hand moving to his gun. You pulled iron on the boss, you know what that means. Samuel nodded slowly. Yeah, I know. His own hand hovered near his revolver, 4 against 1. Bad odds, but maybe he could take Cade down, give Clara time to run, to hide, to survive this. It was the least he owed her. But before anyone could draw, Clara's voice cut through the rain like a whip crack. You'll do no such thing on my land. She'd stepped onto the porch, rifle raised now and aimed directly at Cade's chest. I don't care what business you have with him. You want to settle it, you do it somewhere else. This is my property and I'm telling you to leave. Cade turned to look at her and Samuel saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Walk away and nobody gets hurt. Everything on this land concerns me, Clara said, her voice steel. And I'm not walking anywhere. You want him, you go through me first. The riders shifted uneasily. Killing a woman, especially a respectable widow, was different than killing an outlaw. The law might look the other way for one, but not the other. Cade's jaw clenched in frustration. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Clara agreed, but it's my mistake to make. Now get off my land before I start shooting. For a long moment nobody moved. Rain poured down, the world holding its breath. Then Cade smiled again, cold and patient. All right, Mrs. Whitmore, we'll go, but this isn't over, not by a long shot. He mounted his horse and the riders turned, but before leaving, Cade called back. Jessup's patient, Frost, but he's not that patient. You can't hide behind a woman's skirts forever. Then they were gone, disappearing into the rain and mist. Samuel stood frozen, rain soaking through his clothes, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Clara lowered the rifle slowly, her hands finally starting to shake. Samuel turned to her, something between awe and terror on his face. You shouldn't have done that. Clara met his eyes, rain streaming down her face. Yes, I should have. Because you were about to get yourself killed and I'm not letting that happen. They'll come back, Samuel said. Next time they'll come with more men. They'll burn this place down with you in it. Then we'll be ready, Clara said firmly. She turned and walked back into the cabin, leaving Samuel standing in the rain, completely undone by this woman who just risked everything to keep him alive. He followed her inside, water pooling on the floor around his boots. Clara! She spun to face him, and he saw tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. Don't, she said roughly. Don't tell me it's not worth it. Don't tell me to let you go, because I can't, Samuel. I can't go back to being alone in this house, talking to ghosts and waiting for the silence to swallow me whole. Samuel crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, his good arm wrapping tight around her shoulders. She buried her face against his chest and let out a sob that sounded like it had been building for 3 years. He held her while she shook, while the storm raged outside, while everything they'd built together threatened to come crashing down. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. Clara pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes red but fierce. I'm not. For the first time in years, I feel alive again. Even if it's dangerous, even if it's temporary, I feel like I matter to someone. Like my life means something beyond just surviving day to day. Samuel cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears. You matter, Clara Whitmore, more than you know. And then, because words weren't enough anymore, because everything was falling apart and the only solid thing in his entire broken world was her, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, asking permission. But when she kissed him back, her hands fisting in his wet shirt, it became something more. Something desperate and hopeful and terrified all at once. And they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Samuel pressed his forehead against hers. We can't stay here, he said quietly. Cade meant what he said. They'll come back with enough men to take what they want, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. Clara's fingers tightened on his shirt. So what do we do? Samuel pulled back to look at her properly. We run together. Leave tonight, head for the mountains. I know places Jessup's men won't find us. We can start over, build something new. Clara looked around the cabin, at everything she and Thomas had built, at the life she'd lived here for so many years. Letting go felt like betrayal, but staying felt like death. What about the animals? She asked. We take what we can carry, turn the rest loose. They'll survive. Clara nodded slowly, her mind racing through everything they'd need, everything they'd have to leave behind. All right, she said finally. We run, but Samuel, he met her eyes. We're not just surviving anymore. We're building something real, a real home, a real life together. Samuel kissed her forehead gently. Together, he promised. And as the rain continued to fall and darkness gathered outside, they began to pack their lives into saddlebags, preparing to flee into an uncertain future that somehow felt more hopeful than any certainty they'd known before. They worked through the night in tense silence, gathering what mattered and leaving behind what didn't. Clara folded Thomas's old coat and set it on the bed, her fingers lingering on the worn fabric before she turned away. Some ghosts had to be left behind if new life was going to take root. Samuel packed ammunition, dried meat, blankets thick enough for mountain cold. His shoulder ached with every movement, but he didn't slow down. Dawn would bring Cade back, and they needed to be miles gone before that happened. But fate, as it often did, had different plans. The sound came just before midnight. Boots on the porch, too many of them, moving with practiced stealth. Samuel's hand flew to his gun as Clara blew out the lamp, plunging them into darkness. Through the window they saw shadows moving, at least 6 men surrounding the cabin. Cade's voice cut through the night, no longer patient or polite. We can do this easy or hard, Frost. Your choice. Samuel's mind raced. They were trapped. The cabin had only one door, one real exit, and it was covered. The windows were too small to climb through quickly. Fight their way out and Clara would die in the crossfire. Surrender and he'd die slowly while they made her watch. Neither option was acceptable. Clara's hand found his in the darkness and squeezed hard. The cellar, she whispered urgently. There's a tunnel. Thomas built it during the Indian scares, leads out past the barn. Hope flared in Samuel's chest. Can we make it? If we're quiet. They moved like shadows toward the trapdoor hidden beneath the kitchen table. Samuel lifted it slowly, every creak of the hinges sounding like thunder in his ears. Below, darkness yawned like an open mouth. Clara went first, Samuel following, and easing the door closed above them just as the front door exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood. The cellar was absolute blackness, cold and damp and smelling of earth. Clara's hand found his and pulled him forward. Stay low, follow me, don't make a sound. Above them, boots thundered across the floor. Voices shouted. Furniture crashed as Cade's men tore through the cabin searching for them. Samuel and Clara moved through the tunnel on hands and knees, feeling their way along dirt walls, breathing as quietly as possible while their hearts hammered against their ribs. The tunnel seemed endless. Samuel's shoulder screamed, his knees scraped raw through his pants, but he kept moving. Behind them, the sounds of destruction continued. Glass shattered, doors slammed, then Cade's voice, closer now, directly above them. They're not here. Another voice responded, frustrated. Tracks led straight to the cabin, they didn't leave. Then they're hiding, tear this place apart, check everywhere. Clara's pace quickened. The tunnel began to slope upward and Samuel saw a faint light ahead, not dawn, just the lesser darkness of open night. They emerged behind the barn into cold air that tasted like freedom. Clara pulled him up and they ran, keeping the barn between them and the cabin, heading for the tree line. Behind them someone shouted. They'd been spotted. Gunfire cracked through the night. Bullets whined past Samuel's head and thudded into tree trunks. He pulled Clara down behind a fallen log as more shots rang out. "We need horses," he gasped. "Can't outrun them on foot." Clara pointed through the trees. "Old McCreary Place, half-mile north. Abandoned, but the barn still stands. Might be wild horses sheltering there from the weather." They ran again, weaving through pines as pursuit crashed through the underbrush behind them. Samuel could hear Cade shouting orders, organizing his men, closing the net. His lungs burned and his vision swam, but Clara's hand in his kept him moving. They burst from the trees into an overgrown clearing where a collapsed farmhouse rotted beside a barn that leaned dangerously but still stood. Inside the barn, 3 horses huddled against the cold, wild-eyed and skittish. Samuel approached slowly, hands out, voice low and soothing despite the urgency screaming in his veins. "Easy now, easy." The nearest horse, a gray mare, let him close enough to grab her mane. Clara did the same with a smaller brown gelding. No saddles, no bridles, just desperation and hope. They swung onto the horse's bareback as Cade and his men emerged from the tree line. "There!" someone shouted. Guns blazed. Samuel kicked the mare hard and she leaped forward, Clara right beside him on the gelding. They thundered across the clearing and back into the forest, branches whipping past, roots threatening to trip the horses with every stride. The pursuit followed, relentless, angry, determined. For an hour they rode hard through darkness, the horses' breath coming in great white plumes, foam flecking their necks. Samuel didn't know these mountains, but Clara did. She led them up steep trails and down into ravines, across freezing streams and through stands of pines so thick the horses had to push sideways through them. Slowly, gradually, the sounds of pursuit faded. Either they'd lost them or Cade had decided to wait for daylight. Neither possibility brought much comfort. As dawn broke gray and cold, they stopped in a narrow canyon to let the horses rest and drink from a thin stream. Samuel slid off the mare and immediately his legs buckled. Clara caught him, her arm around his waist. "Your shoulder's bleeding again." He looked down and saw fresh blood soaking through his shirt. The wild ride had torn open the barely healed wound. "I'm fine," he lied. Clara pulled him down to sit on a rock and examined the injury with gentle but firm hands. "You're not fine. You need proper rest and medicine we don't have." She tore a strip from her underskirt and wrapped it tight around his shoulder, her face close to his, concentration making her beautiful in the growing light. "We can't stop," Samuel said. "They'll keep coming." "I know," Clara tied off the bandage and sat back on her heels. "But we can't run forever either. Eventually we have to make a stand or find somewhere they can't follow." Samuel looked around the canyon, his tactical mind working despite exhaustion. "How well do you know these mountains?" "Well enough. My father used to hunt here. There are places, hidden places. An old mining camp up near the high passes, abandoned 20 years ago. If we can reach it, we might be able to hold out until Cade gives up." "Men like Cade don't give up," Samuel said quietly. Clara met his eyes. "Then we make him give up, or we end this another way." There was steel in her voice that Samuel recognized, the sound of a woman who'd been pushed far enough. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully. Clara stood and walked to the edge of the stream, looking back the way they'd come. "I'm thinking that we've been running since the moment you knocked on my door. Maybe it's time we stopped running and started fighting." Samuel pushed to his feet, swaying slightly. "Clara, there are 6 of them, maybe more. Even if we had good positions, good weapons, we're outgunned and outnumbered." "But we have something they don't," Clara said, turning to face him. "We know this land. We know where to set traps, where to funnel them, where to make them vulnerable." Samuel studied her face, seeing the determination there, the fierce protectiveness of someone defending not just her life but something more precious, the future she just started to believe in again. "You're serious?" "I'm tired of losing everything I care about," Clara said simply. "I lost Thomas. I lost my home. I'm not losing you too, not without a fight." Something shifted in Samuel's chest, something that felt like courage borrowed from her strength. "All right," he said. "We fight, but we do it smart. We choose the ground, set the terms." Clara nodded. "The mining camp, there's only one trail in, steep and narrow. We can see anyone coming from a mile away. And if they surround it, they can't. Sheer cliffs on 3 sides, the trail on the 4th. We go in, we control who comes out." They rode on as the sun climbed higher, following game trails and deer paths that wound ever upward into the mountains. The air grew thinner and colder. Snow appeared in patches, then in drifts, then everywhere. The horses struggled, but Clara urged them on with whispered encouragement and steady hands. By midday they reached the mining camp, a cluster of collapsed buildings and rusted equipment scattered across a small plateau. Just as Clara had said, cliffs rose on 3 sides like fortress walls. The trail they'd climbed was the only way up or down. Samuel immediately began assessing their position while Clara gathered what supplies she could from the ruins. He found an old powder magazine, still intact, with 3 sticks of dynamite so old he wasn't sure they'd explode or just crumble. He found mining tools that could be turned into weapons, coils of wire for trip lines, rotted timbers that would still burn. It wasn't much, but it was something. Clara built a fire in the most intact building, a small structure that had once been the foreman's office. Windows on all sides gave clear views of the approaches. She melted snow for water and rationed out the dried meat they'd managed to bring. They ate in silence, too exhausted for words, too aware that this might be their last quiet moment. As afternoon shadows stretched long, Samuel spotted movement on the trail below. He called Clara to the window, and together they watched 6 riders climbing toward them, Cade in the lead. "Right on time," Samuel muttered. He checked his revolver, 4 bullets left. Clara's rifle held 6. Against 6 men it was barely enough, but it would have to be. The riders stopped just out of rifle range, spreading across the trail. Cade dismounted and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Frost, we know you're up there. Only one way this ends, and you know it." Samuel leaned out the window just enough to be seen. "Then come and finish it, Cade, or are you afraid?" Cade's laugh echoed off the canyon walls. "Afraid? Of a wounded outlaw and a widow woman. We'll come all right, but not today. You see, I've got patience now. We'll camp down here nice and comfortable and wait. You've got no food, no supplies, nowhere to run. Couple days of cold and hunger and you'll come down on your own. Then we'll finish this." Samuel pulled back from the window, his jaw clenched in frustration. "He's right, we can't outlast a siege." But Clara was smiling, a cold, dangerous expression Samuel had never seen before. "He thinks we're going to wait up here like cornered animals. Aren't we?" "No," Clara said quietly. "We're going hunting." As night fell, Clara explained her plan. The trail was narrow with cliffs on both sides. Cade's men would have to camp strung out along it, unable to gather in one defensible position. In the darkness, 2 people who knew these mountains could move along the cliff edges, come at them from above, pick them off one by one. It was dangerous, maybe suicidal, but it was better than freezing to death waiting for the inevitable. They prepared carefully. Samuel took the dynamite and wire, planning to rig the trail itself. Clara took her rifle and a knife. They darkened their faces with ash and wrapped their hands in cloth to prevent frostbite. As the moon rose pale and distant, they slipped out of the camp and began their descent, not down the trail but along the cliff face itself, using handholds and narrow ledges that would have been impossible to see in daylight. The climb was terrifying. One wrong step meant a 100-foot fall onto rocks below. Samuel's shoulder protested every pull, every stretch, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. Below them, Cade's camp glowed with firelight. They could hear voices, laughter, the confidence of men who thought they'd already won. That confidence would be their downfall. Samuel reached the first position and began rigging the dynamite to a section of trail that overhung the cliff. A simple wire trigger stretched across the path at ankle height. When someone tripped it in the morning, the explosion would take out the trail and anyone standing on it. He worked quickly, fingers numb from cold, and then moved on to the next position. Clara had circled above the camp and now lay on a ledge overlooking where two of Cade's men stood watch. She could hear them talking about what they'd do to Samuel when they caught him, how they'd make the widow watch before they killed her too. Ray, cold and pure, flooded through her. These men had taken everything, her peace, her home, her chance at happiness. They would take nothing more. She raised the rifle, sighted carefully, and fired. The shot cracked through the night and one of the men dropped without a sound. The other spun, confused, searching for the shooter. Clara had already moved, scrambling along the ledge to a new position. Below, the camp erupted into chaos. Men grabbed weapons and shouted questions. Cade's voice rose above the confusion, trying to restore order. Samuel heard the shot and knew Clara had made her move. He lit the fuse on his first trap and ran, scrambling back up the cliff face as fast as his damaged shoulder would allow. Behind him, the dynamite exploded with a roar that shook the mountain. Rock and debris rained down, and when the dust cleared, a section of trail simply no longer existed. Anyone trying to climb up would have to find another route, buying them precious time. Two more shots echoed from Clara's position. Samuel couldn't tell if they'd hit, but the return fire was wild and panicked. He reached a vantage point and saw Cade's men pinned down, unable to see their attackers in the darkness, shooting at shadows. One man broke and ran, stumbling down the trail in blind panic. He made it 20 yards before Clara's rifle spoke again and he fell. Cade was screaming now, trying to rally his men, but fear had taken root. They were being hunted in the dark by enemies they couldn't see, on ground they didn't know. Samuel lit his second fuse and retreated as another explosion tore through the night, collapsing more of the trail and cutting off the easiest retreat route. For hours they moved through the darkness, ghosts on the mountain dealing death from above. By dawn, only 3 of Cade's men remained alive, and one of those was wounded badly. They'd abandoned the trail entirely, huddled in a defensive position among the rocks, guns pointed in all directions, jumping at every sound. Cade stood in the center of his broken crew, face twisted with rage and something close to fear. He'd underestimated them, thought them weak, desperate, easy prey. Instead, they turned his trap back on him, and now he was the one bleeding out in hostile territory. Samuel appeared on a ridge above them, silhouetted against the rising sun. "It's over, Cade. Take your men and go. Tell Jessup I'm dead if you want. Tell him whatever keeps him from sending more." Cade raised his gun, but his hand shook. "This isn't over, Frost. You killed my men. Jessup will." "Jessup isn't here," Samuel cut him off. "You are, and if you don't leave right now, you'll die here, your choice." For a long moment, Cade stared up at him, hatred burning in his eyes. Then he lowered his gun. "We're leaving, but this debt doesn't go away just because." Clara's voice rang out from another position, cold as mountain ice. "The debt is paid, in blood. Now get out of these mountains before we change our minds." Cade looked between them, outnumbered and outfought, and finally nodded. He helped his wounded man onto a horse, and the 3 survivors began the long, painful descent, leaving their dead behind. Samuel and Clara watched until they disappeared from sight, neither speaking, barely breathing. When the last rider vanished, Clara's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the rocks. Samuel scrambled down to her, pulling her into his arms as she started to shake, not from cold or fear, but from the sheer weight of what they'd just done. "We survived," she whispered against his chest. "We actually survived." Samuel held her tight, his own hands trembling. "We did more than survive. We won." They sat like that as the sun climbed higher, warming the frozen world around them. 2 people who'd been strangers just weeks ago, now bound by blood and choice and something deeper than either could name. Finally, Clara pulled back and looked up at him. "What now?" Samuel glanced at the mining camp above them, then back toward the mountains stretching endless in every direction. "Now we find somewhere new, somewhere nobody knows our names or our stories. We build that home you talked about." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "Together." Together, Samuel promised, and kissed her there on the mountainside while the wind sang through the pines and carried their old lives away like smoke. They traveled north for 3 weeks, following old trapper routes and game trails that wound through valleys most people had forgotten existed. The horses carried them through aspen groves turning gold with autumn and across streams so cold they made your teeth ache just looking at them. Samuel's shoulder healed slowly, the constant movement keeping it stiff, but the fresh mountain air somehow cleaning the wound better than any medicine. Clara rode beside him in silence most days, her face turned toward horizons she'd never seen before, something like wonder replacing the grief that had lived in her eyes for so long. They passed through a settlement once, a cluster of buildings barely worthy of the name town, just to buy supplies. The shopkeeper, an old man with suspicious eyes, took their money but asked no questions. Samuel bought ammunition and Clara chose fabric, flour, salt, things that spoke of permanence rather than flight. As they loaded the pack horse, a young woman approached Clara, a baby on her hip and concern in her face. "You two married?" she asked quietly. Clara hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Just recently." The woman smiled, something sad in it. "Good. A woman alone out here people talk, but you seem like decent folk. There's land up north past Kettle Creek, nobody's claimed it yet. Good water, timber, flat enough for farming. Might be worth looking at if you're searching for a place to settle." She shifted the baby higher. "My husband and I almost went there ourselves, but his mother took sick and we had to stay. Still think about it sometimes, what might have been." Clara thanked her and they rode on, but the woman's words stuck with them. That night, camped under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Clara brought it up. "Kettle Creek, we could look." Samuel poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "You want to stop running, don't you?" Clara pulled her blanket tighter. "I'm tired, Samuel. Tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of sleeping on the ground, tired of not knowing where we'll be tomorrow. Maybe it's time we found our place, and defended it if we have to." Samuel studied her face in the firelight, seeing the determination there mixed with something softer, hope, fragile and new as a spring leaf. "What if they find us?" "What if they don't?" Clara countered. "We can't live our whole lives as ghosts. Eventually we have to decide we're worth more than just surviving, we're worth living." She reached across the fire and took his hand. "I want to live, Samuel, with you, in a real home, not a cave or a camp or someone else's abandoned dream. Our home." The words settled into Samuel's chest like an anchor finding bottom. He'd been drifting so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to have a destination, a purpose beyond the next mile. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll look at this land, and if it's good, if it feels right, we'll stake our claim." Clara's smile could have lit the whole mountain. "We'll build something beautiful," she promised. "Something worth all of this." They found Kettle Creek 4 days later. The land spread before them like a promise, a wide valley cradled between gentle hills, thick with pine and aspen, a creek running clear and fast through the center. Meadows opened in places where the sun could reach, grass tall enough to hide in, wildflowers painting the ground in colors that made Clara gasp. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp and free. Samuel dismounted and walked into the meadow, feeling the land beneath his boots, solid and real. "What do you think?" Clara asked, still on her horse, watching him with barely contained excitement. Samuel turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. Good timber for building, water for drinking and irrigation, natural shelter from the hills, game trails suggesting deer and elk, distance from any town or settlement, privacy without isolation. "I think," he said slowly, "it's perfect." Clara slid off her horse and ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. He lifted her off her feet and spun her once, both of them laughing like children who'd found treasure. When he set her down, she grabbed his face and kissed him hard. "We're home," she whispered against his lips. "Finally, we're home." They spent that first day simply walking the land, planning where the cabin would go, where the barn would stand, where Clara's garden would bloom come spring. They found a spot where 2 hills curved together, creating natural shelter from northern winds, with a view of the entire valley. "Here," Clara said, pointing to a flat area beneath a massive pine. "The cabin goes here." That night they made love for the first time under the pine tree that would shelter their home, wrapped in blankets with stars watching overhead. It was slow and tender and fierce all at once, both of them claiming each other, claiming this land, claiming the future they'd fought so hard to reach. Afterward, Clara lay with her head on Samuel's chest, his arm around her shoulders, her fingers tracing the scar where the bullet had torn through him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Knocking on my door that night," Samuel's hand tightened on her shoulder, "only that it put you in danger, everything else, every moment since. No, I'd do it all again." Clara tilted her head to look up at him. "Even the parts where people were shooting at us," Samuel smiled. "Especially those parts. That's when I knew for certain you were crazy enough to actually keep me around." Clara laughed and swatted his chest, then sobered. "I never thought I'd feel this way again. After Thomas, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd just exist until I stopped existing, and that would be that." She paused, searching for words. "But you made me want to live again, made me feel like the world still held possibilities instead of just obligations and memories." "You did the same for me," Samuel said quietly. "I was running toward nothing, just away from everything. You gave me something to run toward instead, someone worth becoming better for." They fell silent, holding each other as the night deepened and the fire burned low. Tomorrow they would start building. Tonight they simply existed together, two broken people who'd somehow made each other whole. The work began at dawn. Samuel felled trees while Clara stripped branches and bark. His shoulder protested at first but grew stronger with each swing of the axe. They worked in a rhythm that felt ancient, passing tools without words, knowing instinctively what the other needed. By the end of the first week, they'd cleared enough timber for the cabin walls and started laying the foundation stones Clara pulled from the creek bed. The cabin took shape slowly, one log at a time, one wall rising then another. Samuel taught Clara how to notch the logs so they'd fit tight, and she taught him which trees would split clean for shingles. They made mistakes, tore down what didn't work, rebuilt better. Their hands blistered and bled and calloused over. At night they collapsed into their bedrolls too exhausted for anything but sleep, but each morning they woke eager to continue, watching their dream take solid form. One afternoon, a month into the building, Clara stopped mid-swing with a hammer and pressed her hand to her stomach. Samuel looked up from where he was working on the door frame. "What's wrong?" Clara's face had gone pale, her eyes wide. "I'm late," she whispered. "My monthly, I'm late." The hammer slipped from her fingers. Samuel crossed to her in 3 strides. "How late?" 6 weeks, maybe more. I lost track with all the traveling." Her hand remained pressed to her stomach, protective already. "Samuel, I think I might be." She couldn't finish the sentence, as if saying it out loud might break the spell. Samuel's hands came up to frame her face, his expression transforming from concern to wonder. "A baby?" Clara nodded, tears spilling over. "I'm not certain, but all the signs, I think so." Samuel pulled her close, his own eyes burning. A child, their child, life they'd created together out of ashes and desperate choices and love that had grown fierce without either of them noticing. "We need to finish this cabin," he said roughly. "Before winter, before." He pulled back to look at her. "Are you all right? Should you be working this hard?" Clara laughed through her tears. "I'm pregnant, not dying. Women have been building homes while carrying babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." But Samuel wouldn't hear it. From that day forward, he insisted she rest more, took on the heavier work himself, fussed over her in ways that made her roll her eyes even as her heart swelled. The cabin rose faster, driven by new urgency. They needed walls before snow, a roof before storms, a hearth for warmth when Clara's time came. Samuel worked until his hands bled, until his shoulders screamed, until Clara physically dragged him away to rest. 2 months later, the cabin stood complete. Small but solid, with a stone fireplace, real windows Clara had insisted they buy on a supply run, and a door that hung straight and closed tight. Samuel carried Clara over the threshold the day they moved in, her laughter echoing off the new walls. They had a table he'd built from pine, chairs that matched, a bed frame still waiting for a real mattress but comfortable enough with piled blankets. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, every nail and board and stone. Their first night in the cabin, they lay in bed listening to the wind outside and the fire crackling in the hearth. Clara's hand rested on her belly, which had just started to show a gentle curve. "What should we name them?" she asked. Samuel's hand covered hers, both of them feeling for movement still too early to detect. "If it's a boy, Thomas," Clara said immediately, then hesitated. "If that's all right, to honor." "It's perfect," Samuel said. "And if it's a girl?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Hope, because that's what this is, isn't it? After everything we've been through, after all we've lost and survived, this baby is hope that the future can be better than the past." Samuel kissed her temple. "Hope Frost, I like it." "Hope Whitmore Frost," Clara corrected. "I'm not giving up my name entirely, even if we're not properly married yet." The words hung in the air. They'd been living as husband and wife for months now, but without a preacher or papers, it was common law at best. Samuel shifted to look at her in the firelight. "We should make it real, official, not because we have to, but because I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours." Clara smiled. "Nearest preacher is 4 days' ride away, and I'm not making that trip in my condition." "Then we'll do it ourselves," Samuel said firmly. "Right here, right now. Before God and this land and the life we're building together." He slid out of bed and pulled Clara to her feet, both of them barefoot in their night clothes. They stood facing each other in front of the fireplace, hands joined, and Samuel spoke words that came from somewhere deeper than memory. "I, Samuel Frost, take you, Clara Whitmore, as my wife. I promise to protect you, provide for you, love you through whatever comes. I promise to be the man you saw in me when I was bleeding on your floor with nothing to offer but trouble. I promise to build this life with you, raise our child with you, grow old with you if fate allows. Before this fire and this land and whatever God is listening, I'm yours, now and always." Clara's voice shook but held strong. "I, Clara Whitmore, take you, Samuel Frost, as my husband. I promise to stand beside you, fight with you, love you through storm and sunshine. I promise to be the woman you made me want to be again, strong and hopeful and alive. I promise to build this home with you, raise our child with you, face whatever tomorrow brings knowing we face it together. Before this fire and this land and whatever God is listening, I'm yours, now and always." They had no rings, no witnesses, no official document. But as Samuel kissed his wife in the cabin they'd built with their own bleeding hands, with their child growing between them and the future stretching wide and unknown, it felt more real and binding than any ceremony could have made it. They were married in every way that mattered, by choice, by love, by the unbreakable bond of two people who'd saved each other from drowning. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with snow that piled high against the cabin walls. But inside they were warm, the fireplace Samuel had built drawing perfectly, the walls tight enough to keep out even the worst winds. Clara's belly grew round as the snow deepened. Samuel hunted when the weather allowed, bringing back deer and elk that he smoked and stored. They rationed carefully, knowing the winter would be long. On the coldest nights, they sat by the fire and talked about everything and nothing. Samuel told stories of his childhood before the outlaw years, memories of a mother who died too young and a father who'd done his best and failed anyway. Clara spoke of Thomas with less pain now, able to remember the good without being crushed by the loss. They were building a new story together, one where the past informed but didn't imprison. Clara taught Samuel to read better, sounding out words from the one book they owned, a Bible she'd salvaged from her old cabin. Samuel taught Clara to shoot with accuracy, insisting she needed to be able to protect herself and the baby if anything ever happened to him. "Nothing's going to happen to you," Clara said firmly, but she learned anyway, her pregnant belly making the rifle rest awkward but her aim growing steady. The baby kicked for the first time in late January. Clara grabbed Samuel's hand and pressed it to her stomach, and they both felt it, a flutter like a bird taking flight inside her. Samuel's face transformed with wonder. "That's our child," he whispered. "Our child." Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face, and they sat like that for an hour, hands on her belly, waiting for each precious movement. But as winter deepened, worry crept in. Clara's time was approaching and they were alone, miles from any midwife or doctor. Samuel tried not to show his fear, but Clara saw it anyway. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, she reminded him. We'll manage. What if something goes wrong? Samuel asked roughly. What if I can't help you, can't save you? Clara took his face in her hands. Then you do your best and trust that love is enough. But Samuel, you need to promise me something. Her voice grew serious. If it comes down to a choice, if something goes wrong and you can only save one of us, you save the baby. You hear me? You save our child. Don't ask me to make that choice, Samuel said, his voice breaking. I can't lose you. And I can't lose the chance that something good comes from all this, Clara replied. That baby is hope, Samuel. Hope that deserves to live even if I don't. Samuel pulled her close, holding her as tightly as he dared with her swollen belly between them. I won't lose either of you, he said fiercely. I didn't survive bullets and storms and Cade's men just to lose you to childbirth. We're going to make it through this, all three of us. Clara wanted to believe him. As she felt their child move inside her and Samuel's arms around her and the warmth of the home they'd built, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe owed them this one kindness. That after everything they'd endured, they'd earned the right to their happiness. But the winter wind howled outside, indifferent to hope or promises, and somewhere in the darkness, the future waited with secrets they couldn't yet see.